Apache woman dragged a dying rancher through a blizzard. What he discovered changed everything. The winter had come early that year. The snow covered the wide plains in a thick white blanket, and the wind blew hard, carrying a chill that seemed to cut right through a person's clothes. In the middle of this harsh landscape stood an old ranch, far away from towns or neighbors. Its wooden fences were worn and creaky, and the fields, once full of lively cattle, were now almost empty. The rancher who lived there, a man in his late 60s, had spent most of his life working this land. His hair was gray, his hands were calloused, and his face was lined with years of sun, wind, and hard work. Life on the ranch had always been lonely, but after the loss of his wife and children moving to the city, he had grown used to it. The quiet, he thought, was his only company. Despite the isolation, he loved the ranch. It had been in his family for generations, and he had memories of laughter, festivals, and busy mornings tending to animals. Now, though, it was just him, the cold, and the wind that whispered through the empty fields. He woke early each day, not out of excitement or duty, but out of habit. Even in the harsh winter, he would check on the livestock, make sure the fences were strong enough to hold the animals, and keep the water troughs from freezing. This particular morning, the rancher felt a sharp bite in the air. The snow had been falling heavily for hours, and the sky was gray and heavy with clouds. The wind made it hard to see more than a few feet in front of him. He wrapped his thick coat tightly around his shoulders and stepped outside, determined to check on the cattle. Each step was heavy, sinking deep into the soft snow. His boots crunched with every movement, and his breath came out in white puffs that quickly disappeared in the cold. He paused for a moment, listening. The only sounds were the wind whistling past the wooden fence posts and the occasional creak of a tree branch bending under the weight of snow. As he moved further across the field, he noticed the sky growing darker. The snow was no longer just falling. It was being carried by the wind in sharp, stinging gusts. He knew he had to hurry. The cattle were scattered near the far end of the ranch, and he had to make sure none of them had wandered into trouble. Each step was harder than the last. The snow was deep, and the cold began to seep through even his thick gloves. He adjusted his scarf and pressed on, thinking about how important it was to protect the animals even in this weather. Far away in the same vast, snow-covered plains, another figure struggled through the storm. She was an Apache woman traveling alone, wrapped in layers of blankets and furs. Her movements were careful and deliberate. Every step was measured, but the snow was relentless. It covered the ground in thick drifts, and the wind tried to push her back. She was used to hardship. She had grown up learning how to survive in the wild. She knew the land, the patterns of the weather, and the dangers that lurked in the cold. But even she had never faced a storm like this. Her goal was simple: to reach the next shelter wherever it might be. Her pace was slow but steady. She refused to give up, because stopping in this snowstorm could be fatal. As the rancher moved toward the cattle, he did not notice the woman at first. His focus was on the fences, the ice, and the animals that were hidden in the snowy field. He was careful, stepping over icy patches and pushing aside snow-covered branches, but the cold made his muscles stiff, and the wind made it hard to see. In the distance, the snow created illusions, and the shapes of trees and rocks seemed to move. He squinted and adjusted his hat, trying to make out the forms ahead. He could hear something, faint at first, like the crunch of footsteps over snow, but he thought it might just be the wind playing tricks on him. Meanwhile, the Apache woman's eyes scanned the land, sharp and alert. She could feel danger everywhere, not just from the storm, but from slipping on hidden ice, getting lost, or encountering wild animals. Her family had taught her to respect the land, to move carefully, and to trust her instincts. She had traveled alone many times, but the winter storms were the hardest. Every minute in this freezing wind was a battle against nature itself. Her lungs burned as she breathed in the icy air. But she did not stop. She kept moving, knowing that the only way to survive was to keep going. The rancher finally reached the edge of the cattle field. He looked around, calling softly to the animals, hoping to see them huddled together for warmth. Some were there, their coats frosted over, shivering in the cold. Others were farther away, wandering near the broken fence line. He sighed and began to make his way toward them. The snow was knee-deep in places, and he had to lift his legs high to move. He felt the weight of age and exhaustion pressing down on him. His joints ached, and his body was not as strong as it used to be. But he forced himself forward. The animals depended on him. Suddenly, his foot slipped on a patch of ice hidden beneath the snow. He fell hard, landing awkwardly on his leg. Pain shot through him, sharp and blinding. He tried to move, but his leg was twisted, and every attempt sent more pain through his body. The wind howled around him, and the snow made it hard to see. He called out, but his voice was lost in the storm. He realized he might not be able to get up on his own. Panic began to rise, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew that panicking would only make things worse. At that moment, the Apache woman noticed a figure in the snow. She had been moving slowly, scanning the horizon, when she saw the rancher struggling. Instantly, her instincts kicked in. She did not know who he was, but she knew he was in danger. Without hesitation, she made her way toward him, pushing through the wind and snow. Her body ached, and the cold bit at her fingers and toes, but she refused to stop. Every step was a challenge, but she moved with determination, guided by a sense of duty and compassion. The rancher saw her approaching and felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Who was this woman, and how had she come through this terrible storm? He tried to speak, but the words froze in his throat. She knelt beside him, assessing the situation quickly. Her eyes were sharp and calm, and her movements were confident. She spoke softly, telling him to stay still, that she would help him. Her voice carried warmth and reassurance, cutting through the fear that had begun to settle in his mind. As she prepared to help him, the rancher noticed her clothing, furs and blankets layered over each other, practical and warm, with details he had never seen before. He realized she must have traveled far and through many hardships to survive in this storm. Despite the cold, the snow, and the wind, she moved with strength and purpose. Her presence gave him hope. He felt a flicker of trust, even though he had never met her before. Little did he know, this encounter would change his life in ways he could never imagine. The storm, the isolation, and the danger were only the beginning. The woman's knowledge, courage, and resilience would reveal secrets about survival, the land, and even himself that he had never understood before. In the harsh winter landscape, a meeting that seemed accidental was actually the start of an extraordinary story, one that would test their strength, challenge their assumptions, and ultimately transform them both. The rancher could barely move. The sharp pain in his leg made every attempt to stand impossible. His breath came in short gasps, fogging in the cold air, and his body shivered uncontrollably. He had fallen in the deep snow, and the storm showed no sign of slowing. The wind whipped around him, and the snow stung his face like tiny needles. For a moment, despair threatened to take hold. He was alone, injured, and the white, endless plains stretched around him with no one else in sight. But the Apache woman was not going to let him remain there. She quickly assessed the situation. His leg was twisted in an unnatural way, and he could barely support his own weight. She knew that moving him would be difficult, dangerous even, but staying in the snow was far more dangerous. Frostbite could set in within minutes, and hypothermia would follow if he was left exposed. She drew a deep breath, feeling the icy wind slice through her layers of clothing, and prepared herself to act. Gently, she instructed him to stay calm. Her voice was soft but firm, carrying authority without harshness. She told him to lean slightly to one side while she lifted him carefully, supporting his upper body. The rancher felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. Despite the storm, despite the blinding snow, this woman moved with strength, skill, and confidence. He realized he was completely at her mercy, yet somehow he trusted her completely. Step by step, she began dragging him. At first, progress was slow. The deep snow held them both back, and the rancher's weight made every pull a challenge. The wind was relentless, pushing against them and threatening to knock them off balance. She shifted her grip, using her shoulders and back to pull while he tried to help as much as his injured leg allowed. Each movement sent shocks of pain through his body, but he gritted his teeth and endured. The thought of freezing in the snow was far worse than the pain in his leg. The snowstorm made visibility nearly impossible. The rancher could barely make out shapes more than a few feet away, and even the woman's figure blurred in the whiteness. Trees, rocks, and snowdrifts all merged into a white, swirling chaos. But the woman moved with determination, using her knowledge of the land and her instincts to guide them. She could tell the safest path, avoiding hidden ice patches, deep drifts, and places where the snow could collapse under their weight. Every step was carefully chosen, and every movement deliberate. Despite the storm, they communicated in quiet, simple ways. She asked him to adjust his position, to hold his arms in a certain way, or to lean slightly to one side. He listened carefully, realizing that following her instructions was the only way to survive. At first, he felt embarrassed, humbled by his own weakness, but as minutes turned into hours, the embarrassment faded, replaced by gratitude and admiration. This woman, a stranger, was risking herself to save him, and he could do nothing but trust her guidance. The wind grew even stronger. Snow whipped around them in sheets, stinging the rancher's face and making his eyes water. His fingers were numb, and his body felt like it was turning to ice. But the woman pressed on, her movements steady, her energy seemingly endless. She had faced storms like this before, and she knew how to conserve strength while keeping the person she was helping safe. Occasionally, she would stop, crouch beside him, and check his condition. She spoke softly, encouraging him to stay conscious, reminding him to breathe deeply, and warning him not to give in to fear. Hours passed, or at least it felt like hours. The snowstorm showed no mercy, and their progress was slow. The rancher began to feel the first signs of frostbite on his fingers and toes, a painful numbness that made him realize how serious the situation had become. He knew that if they did not find shelter soon, he might not survive the night. The woman seemed to sense the urgency as well. Her pace quickened slightly, though she never overexerted herself. She had learned that conserving energy was key in the cold, and that rushing too fast could be as dangerous as moving too slowly. During brief moments when the wind let up, the rancher noticed small details about the woman. Her eyes were focused and alert, scanning the snow-covered ground for danger. Her hands were strong and capable, moving with purpose as she lifted and pulled him. Even in the harsh storm, there was a quiet confidence about her, a sense that she belonged to the land, and that the land belonged to her. He wondered who she was, where she had come from, and how she had learned to survive in such extreme conditions. Despite the pain, the rancher tried to speak, asking her questions, trying to learn more about her. She replied sparingly, focusing on keeping him moving, but occasionally shared a small detail, a path that was safer, a hidden ridge that offered a windbreak, or a technique to conserve his energy. Each piece of advice was a lesson in survival, and the rancher realized how much he depended on her knowledge. The storm, he thought, was teaching him humility as much as fear. The terrain grew more challenging as they moved forward. Snowdrifts became deeper, and patches of ice threatened to make each step deadly. Rocks hidden beneath the snow caused them to stumble occasionally, and both of them had to adjust constantly. The rancher's leg throbbed with pain, but he kept going, motivated by the woman's determination and by his own will to survive. He noticed that she never complained, never faltered, and seemed completely focused on the goal of getting them to safety. At one point, the rancher's strength began to fail. His hands slipped from her grip, and he nearly toppled over into a deep drift. Panic surged through him, but she quickly steadied him, lifting and supporting his body with skillful hands. "Stay with me," she said quietly but firmly. Her voice cut through the storm like a beacon. He obeyed, clinging to her guidance as if his life depended on it, because it did. The snowstorm began to show small signs of easing as they neared a rise in the land. It was not much, but the wind was slightly less harsh, and the snow fell more gently. The rancher could barely recognize the shapes around him, but he noticed a small outline in the distance, a structure partially covered in snow, almost invisible. The woman pointed toward it and nodded. Shelter, hope, relief surged through him, giving him new energy to endure the final stretch. They moved carefully toward the building, each step deliberate and cautious. The woman adjusted her grip, ensuring he did not slip or fall. The rancher's heart pounded with exhaustion, fear, and gratitude. He realized that without her, he would not have survived even half this journey. The building grew clearer as they approached. A small cabin, perhaps used by hunters or travelers. Its wooden walls were weathered, but it promised warmth and safety, even if minimal. Finally, they reached the cabin. The woman helped him inside, easing him onto a bench and wrapping him in blankets she had carried with her. He could feel his body slowly warming, the immediate threat of frostbite lessening, though his injuries were still serious. He looked at her, trying to speak words of thanks, but the storm outside and the exhaustion inside left him breathless. She smiled faintly, brushing the snow from her clothes, and told him to rest. For the first time in hours, he felt safe. As he lay there, catching his breath, the rancher thought about the ordeal. He realized that the storm could have easily taken his life, yet he had been saved by a woman he had never met, in a land he thought he knew. Her courage, her strength, and her knowledge of survival had given him a second chance. He wondered how many times she had faced storms like this before, and how many others she might have saved without anyone knowing. The snow continued to fall outside, but the rancher felt a strange warmth inside the cabin. He knew that this encounter would change him, though he could not yet understand how. The woman, quiet but strong, had not only saved his life, but had also opened a door to a world he had never fully seen, a world of resilience, courage, and deep knowledge passed down through generations. The storm was still raging outside, but inside, a story of survival, trust, and human connection had already begun. The cabin was small, with wooden walls that creaked under the weight of the snow pressing against them. Inside, the air was still and quiet, a sharp contrast to the furious blizzard outside. The rancher could finally breathe without feeling the biting wind tearing through him. He was wrapped in layers of blankets the Apache woman had brought, and for the first time since the storm had begun, he felt a spark of hope. His leg throbbed painfully, but the immediate danger of freezing had passed. He could rest, at least for a while, and gather strength for what would come next. The woman moved around the cabin with calm efficiency. She checked the small fire pit in the corner, arranging some wood she had found. and soon a faint glow of warmth began to spread across the room. She instructed the rancher to keep still while she tended to his leg. Gently, she examined the injury, her hands steady and practiced. "It's badly twisted," she said softly, "but we can make it better until you can get proper care." Her tone was not alarming, but matter-of-fact, giving the rancher a strange sense of reassurance. He had not realized how comforting a calm presence could be in a life-threatening situation. While she worked, the rancher watched her closely. He noticed the way her hands moved with precision and care, the way her eyes scanned the room and the fire, and the way she seemed to know exactly what to do without hesitation. He had encountered many people in his life, but few carried such quiet strength and skill. There was something in her presence that made him feel both safe and humbled. Here was a woman who had survived the wilderness countless times, and she had chosen to save a stranger without hesitation. She used small tools and strips of cloth from her pack to stabilize his leg. The rancher winced as she gently adjusted his position, but he knew it was necessary. "This will help keep it from getting worse," she explained. Her voice was steady, but there was a kindness in it that made him trust her completely. He realized he had never felt this level of dependence on anyone, and yet he also felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in years, someone else was looking out for him. As the fire crackled and the cabin grew warmer, the rancher began to notice more about his savior. Her clothing, though simple, was practical and well-suited to the harsh conditions outside. Layers of furs and blankets covered her, and her boots were thick but flexible, perfect for moving through snow and ice. There was a quiet intelligence in the way she carried herself, a confidence born of experience. She was not a person easily intimidated by the dangers of the world. He felt a deep respect growing inside him. While she worked, she occasionally spoke, giving him advice on how to stay warm and conserve energy. She told him to drink slowly, to move his fingers and toes gently to keep circulation going, and to breathe steadily. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of someone who had learned from experience, someone who had survived where others might not. The rancher listened carefully, following her guidance. Each instruction, each small piece of advice was a lesson in survival, and he felt grateful to be learning from her. Hours passed, and the rancher began to feel slightly stronger. The pain in his leg was still present, but it was more manageable now that it had been stabilized. He tried to sit up, carefully, and the woman guided him with patience. "Take it slow," she said. "You need to let your body adjust." He realized that even small movements were a test of endurance, and he appreciated her calm presence, which made him feel less afraid. As they settled into the cabin, the rancher noticed other details that intrigued him. There were small carvings on the wooden walls, faint markings that told stories of people who had lived or traveled there before. He asked about them, and for the first time, the woman shared a glimpse of her own life and knowledge. She told him about the land, how to read the snow to find hidden dangers, and how the wind could indicate approaching storms. She spoke of plants that could be used for warmth, for healing, and even for food in harsh conditions. The rancher listened intently, fascinated by her wisdom and the depth of her knowledge. He realized that she carried centuries of experience passed down through generations. She had learned to survive not just through strength, but through understanding the land, the weather, and the ways of nature. Every word she spoke opened his eyes to a world he had never fully seen. He had lived on the land for decades, yet he had only scratched the surface of what it could teach him. Her perspective was completely different from his own, and he began to see the wilderness not as a threat, but as something to respect and learn from. The rancher tried to speak more, asking questions about her life, about her people, and about how she had learned these skills. She answered carefully, sharing enough to satisfy his curiosity without revealing more than she was comfortable with. He realized that there was a quiet dignity in her presence, a strength that did not need to be shown through words or actions. He felt honored to be in her company, to witness a way of life that was so different from his own, yet so connected to the land he loved. As the night wore on, the storm outside continued, but the cabin felt like a safe haven. The rancher, exhausted from the ordeal and the pain, began to feel a sense of calm he had not felt in years. He watched as the woman tended the small fire, her movements careful and deliberate, and he realized that survival was not just about physical strength. It was about patience, observation, knowledge, and compassion. She had saved his life, not just with her physical effort, but with her wisdom and experience. For the first time, he began to understand the depth of human connection. Here was a woman he had never met before, yet she had risked herself to save him. He felt a profound gratitude, and he also felt a sense of awe. He had thought his life on the ranch was isolated and complete, but now he realized there were stories, skills, and knowledge beyond his understanding, waiting to be discovered. This encounter was more than survival. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and trust. The woman finally allowed herself to rest for a moment, sitting on a bench near the fire. She spoke softly about the land, about how snow could hide dangers, and how every step had to be carefully chosen. The rancher listened, absorbing every word. He realized that he had lived his life with confidence in his own abilities, yet here was someone showing him that survival required more than just strength. It required awareness, patience, and wisdom. He felt inspired. The encounter was changing him already. He thought about his own life on the ranch, the routines, the challenges, and the quiet isolation, and he began to see them in a new light. The world was bigger than he had realized, and there was much he could learn from those who had survived in ways he could not imagine. The storm outside had brought them together, but it had also opened a door to understanding, to knowledge, and to a connection that neither of them had expected. By the time the night deepened, the rancher felt a small sense of recovery. His body was still sore, but he was safe, and the immediate danger had passed. He looked at the Apache woman and realized that this was only the beginning. The storm had forced them together, but it had also created an opportunity for him to learn, to grow, and to see the land and life through new eyes. He felt a quiet excitement mixed with respect, knowing that the coming days would reveal more lessons, more challenges, and more discoveries. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the fire and the blankets, and he thought about the journey they had already endured. The woman had saved him not just from the cold, but from despair. She had shown him the strength of knowledge, courage, and compassion, and as he drifted into a light, exhausted sleep, he realized that the encounter would change his life forever. The next morning, the rancher awoke to a quiet stillness inside the cabin. Outside, the storm had slowed, though snow still fell gently, blanketing the land in white. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt a sense of calm and safety. His leg was sore, but the stabilization from the previous night had prevented further damage. As he looked around, he saw the Apache woman moving quietly, checking the small fire and preparing some water. She had already begun gathering a few pieces of wood from the small pile outside to keep them warm. Even in the aftermath of the storm, she moved with grace and efficiency, never wasting energy and always thinking ahead. The rancher attempted to sit up on the bench, testing his strength. The woman noticed immediately and came over to assist him. "Take it slowly," she said. Her voice was gentle but firm, reminding him that patience was necessary in healing. He nodded, appreciating the care she took with every movement. For years he had been accustomed to relying on his own strength, yet here he was, learning to accept help. It was humbling, but he realized it was necessary. Without her, he would not have survived the storm. As the day progressed, the woman began preparing a simple meal from supplies she had brought and a few herbs she knew could help with recovery. She explained to the rancher that proper nourishment and warmth were essential after such exposure to cold. He watched her carefully, noticing the skill in her hands as she prepared the food. She moved with intention, using knowledge passed down through generations. It struck him that survival was more than just getting through a storm. It was about understanding every detail of life in the wilderness, from food to fire, from rest to observation. While he ate slowly, he began to ask her questions about her life and her knowledge of the land. She spoke modestly, sharing stories of traveling across plains, rivers, and mountains, learning from elders, and observing the signs of nature. The rancher listened intently, absorbing every word. He realized that the wisdom she carried was more than survival. It was a deep understanding of the world, of nature, and of people. Each story offered insight into skills he had never thought to develop, and ways of thinking that were completely new to him. The woman also asked him questions about his life. She listened patiently as he told her about the ranch, his past work with cattle, the routines he followed, and the changes that had left him alone in this isolated part of the world. Through conversation, they began to understand each other, not just as strangers brought together by the storm, but as individuals with unique experiences and insights. The rancher realized that, despite their differences in background and culture, they shared a common understanding of the land and its challenges. As the day turned into evening, the rancher's leg continued to improve. The initial pain had lessened, and he could move slightly with the woman's assistance. She encouraged him gently, showing him exercises to prevent stiffness and keep circulation flowing. Every small movement was a victory, a step toward regaining his independence. He began to feel hope again, a feeling that had seemed impossible just a day before. The woman's presence and guidance made him realize how much resilience and determination could shape survival and recovery. During this time, the rancher began observing more subtle details about her. Her eyes, always alert, seemed to notice everything: the movement of the snow outside, the way the fire consumed the wood, the sounds of the wind in the distance. She had an awareness that went beyond survival. It was almost as if she were reading the land itself, understanding its patterns and secrets. He marveled at her ability to remain calm and focused, even after the extreme effort of dragging him through the storm. Her strength was quiet but unmistakable, and he felt a growing respect and admiration. The woman also shared small lessons in practical survival. She taught him how to identify safe paths through snow-covered terrain, how to check the stability of ice on a pond, and how to read subtle changes in the wind and clouds that could signal a coming storm. The rancher listened carefully, realizing that this knowledge was priceless. He had lived on the land for decades, but had only survived through experience and instinct. Here was wisdom that went far beyond what he had known, a depth of understanding that connected generations of people to the earth. As the afternoon passed, the rancher grew more comfortable moving around the cabin with the woman's help. They worked together to repair a small section of the roof that had been damaged in the storm. She showed him how to use simple tools effectively, how to reinforce weak points, and how to observe the structure to prevent future damage. For the first time, he felt a sense of purpose beyond survival. He was learning, working, and contributing alongside someone whose skill he deeply admired. The conversation turned to deeper topics. The woman spoke about the importance of community and tradition in her culture. She explained how knowledge was shared carefully, how survival depended on cooperation, and how every action had a purpose. The rancher reflected on his own life, realizing that his isolation had limited his understanding of the world and the people around him. Listening to her, he began to see the value of connections, of learning from others, and of respecting wisdom even when it came from a culture very different from his own. As evening approached, the woman prepared a small fire near the center of the cabin. They sat together, warming themselves and talking quietly. The rancher felt a sense of gratitude that went beyond words. She had saved his life, guided him through unimaginable danger, and was now teaching him lessons that would last a lifetime. He realized that this encounter was not only about surviving the storm, but also about discovering new perspectives, new knowledge, and a new understanding of life itself. The rancher also noticed the care she took with everything around her. Every movement was intentional, stacking wood, arranging blankets, checking the fire, and even preparing the small meal. It was a lesson in mindfulness, a demonstration that survival was not only about strength, but also about awareness, planning, and respect for resources. He began to understand that her actions were connected to a larger philosophy, one that valued life, nature, and knowledge equally. By the end of the day, the rancher felt stronger, more alert, and more connected to the world around him. He reflected on the storm and the journey that had brought them together. He had been terrified, injured, and unsure if he would survive. Yet here he was, alive and learning from someone whose skills and insight surpassed anything he had imagined. The storm had been a challenge, but it had also been a catalyst, a force that brought him into contact with knowledge, courage, and human kindness that would change his life forever. As night fell, the cabin felt warm and secure. The rancher lay down, thinking about everything he had experienced. He realized that the lessons he had learned went far beyond survival. They were lessons about humility, trust, observation, and respect for knowledge passed through generations. He thought about the strength it took to endure, the patience needed to recover, and the courage required to help another person in the face of extreme danger. These lessons would stay with him long after the snow melted and the storm passed. For the Apache woman, the day had been exhausting but fulfilling. She had saved a life, shared knowledge, and built a bond with someone who would carry forward her wisdom in ways he had not yet realized. She was quiet about her own struggles, never mentioning the hours of physical effort or the danger she had faced. Her focus remained on the rancher's recovery, guiding him patiently and steadily. In her presence, he realized that true strength was often quiet, unnoticed, and selfless. The rancher fell asleep that night with a sense of peace he had not felt in years. The storm outside had tested him, challenged him, and nearly taken him, but it had also introduced him to someone extraordinary. He understood that his life would never be the same. The woman had not only saved him physically, but had opened a door to knowledge, perspective, and connection that he could never have imagined. He knew that in the days to come he would continue to learn from her, grow stronger, and see the world in a completely new light. The next morning, the rancher woke to sunlight filtering through the small windows of the cabin. The snow outside had stopped falling, and the storm that had raged for days was finally easing. For the first time in a long while, the rancher felt a deep sense of calm. He stretched carefully, testing his leg, which now felt stronger than the day before. The Apache woman had stayed close, ready to assist whenever he needed. Her presence was steady, a quiet reassurance that reminded him of how far they had come together. As he moved slowly around the cabin, the rancher began to notice the small details that had always escaped him in his isolated life. The patterns of snow left by the wind, the tracks of animals outside, and the way the firelight reflected on the wooden walls. All of it seemed full of meaning now. He realized that the storm had not only tested him physically, but had opened his eyes to a world he had long ignored. He felt a new respect for the land, for its power, and for the wisdom required to navigate it. The Apache woman was already preparing a simple breakfast. She had gathered herbs and dried foods from her pack, and a small fire warmed the cabin. As they ate together, the rancher felt a bond growing between them. They spoke quietly, sharing stories, observations, and reflections on the storm. She told him about the ways her people had survived for generations in harsh environments, using knowledge, patience, and observation rather than force alone. He listened intently, realizing that this knowledge was more valuable than anything he had learned in his own lifetime. After breakfast, they began working together to repair some of the damage caused by the storm. The roof needed reinforcement, and the fences around the cabin were weak from the snow's weight. The rancher moved more confidently now, following the woman's guidance. She showed him how to secure the beams, how to use ropes to strengthen the structure, and how to observe weak points before they caused problems. The rancher was amazed at her skill and patience, and he began to feel that he had not just survived the storm, but had learned something extraordinary. As the day passed, the rancher realized that the lessons he was learning were more than practical. The woman's knowledge extended to philosophy, patience, and understanding life itself. She spoke about the importance of observing before acting, of respecting both nature and people, and of finding harmony with the world around you. The rancher thought about how he had lived for so many years focused only on work and routine, never truly noticing the depth of the land or the wisdom that could be learned from others. He felt grateful for this unexpected education, one that had been delivered through both survival and conversation. By afternoon, the rancher's leg had improved significantly. He could move without much pain, though he still needed to be careful. The woman encouraged him gently, reminding him that slow, steady progress was better than rushing. They worked side by side, clearing snow from the cabin entrance and reinforcing the small fence that surrounded the property. Every task felt meaningful now. The rancher realized that the storm had not only tested their survival skills, but had also created a partnership based on trust, respect, and shared effort. As the sun began to lower in the sky, painting the snow in golden light, the rancher and the woman paused to rest. He felt a deep sense of reflection. The storm had brought them together, forced them to rely on one another, and revealed the strength of human compassion and wisdom. He thought about the choices he had made in life, the isolation he had accepted, and the new understanding that connection, knowledge, and respect for others could bring. It was a lesson he would carry forever. The woman spoke quietly about her culture and her people, sharing stories of resilience, community, and learning. The rancher listened with rapt attention. He realized that her guidance had not only saved his life, but had also opened a door to a world he had never truly known. He began to see that survival was not only about endurance, but about understanding, respect, and harmony. Every story she shared carried meaning, and he felt privileged to learn from someone with such deep wisdom and experience. As evening approached, the cabin felt warm, safe, and full of life despite its small size. The rancher began to think about what he would do after the storm passed. He wanted to preserve the lessons he had learned, to remember the knowledge and perspective that the woman had shared. He thought about how his life had been limited by isolation and routine, and he realized that new experiences and connections could bring richness and understanding he had never imagined. That night, as they sat by the fire, the rancher reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few days. He had faced near death, been saved by a stranger, and learned wisdom that went far beyond practical survival. The experience had shown him the value of patience, trust, observation, and knowledge passed down through generations. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for being alive, but for the chance to grow, to learn, and to see the world differently. He turned to the woman and thanked her sincerely. "I don't know how to repay you," he said, his voice quiet but full of emotion. She smiled gently, brushing off the comment with modesty.
"You've learned," she said simply.
"That is enough." Her words struck him deeply. He realized that survival and growth were intertwined, and that the greatest gift she had given him was not just life, but perspective and understanding. In the days that followed, the rancher continued to recover. He moved with increasing confidence, repaired more of the cabin, and began planning for the future. The woman stayed with him, guiding him gently, sharing more stories and lessons, and helping him build a renewed respect for the land. Together, they transformed the small cabin into a place of safety, knowledge, and harmony. The storm had ended, but its lessons remained vivid and alive in their actions. The rancher began to reflect on his own life, considering how he might use what he had learned. He thought about the isolation he had once valued, and realized that connection, understanding, and shared effort could bring far more fulfillment than solitude. He appreciated the importance of listening, observing, and learning from others, no matter how different their background or culture. These insights would shape the way he lived for the rest of his days. As weeks passed, the bond between the rancher and the woman grew stronger. He relied on her guidance less for physical survival and more for understanding the deeper lessons of life. He began to see patterns in the land, understand the weather, and notice small signs that he had previously ignored. The skills she had taught him were now part of his daily routine, and her philosophy of life became a guiding principle. He realized that the storm had given him a rare opportunity, not just to survive, but to transform his perspective and his way of living. One evening, as the sun set behind the snow-covered plains, the rancher looked out at the horizon. The snow sparkled in the fading light, and he felt a profound sense of peace. He had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, yet he had come through stronger, wiser, and more connected to the world around him. He thought of the woman whose courage, knowledge, and compassion had made all the difference. He understood that their encounter was not just a story of survival, but a story of growth, understanding, and the human spirit. In the end, the rancher knew that he would never forget this experience. The storm had been a challenge, but it had also been a teacher. The woman had been more than a rescuer. She had been a mentor, a guide, and a reminder that life's greatest lessons often come from unexpected places. He felt a deep gratitude for the chance to learn, to grow, and to see the world with new eyes. He realized that what had seemed like a random encounter in the blizzard was actually a turning point in his life. It had taught him about courage, resilience, compassion, and the power of knowledge. It had reminded him of the value of human connection and the importance of learning from those who have faced different challenges. And most importantly, it had given him hope, not just for survival, but for living a life richer in understanding, respect, and wisdom. As night fell over the snow-covered plains, the rancher finally rested fully. His body healed and his spirit renewed. He knew that he had been given more than life. He had been given insight, friendship, and the understanding that true strength comes not only from physical endurance, but from courage, compassion, and knowledge. The storm had passed, but its lessons would stay with him forever.